This is from The Hollywood Reporter, and honestly, it just seems like clickbait nonsense to me. This is the headline. Star Wars looks terrible in screening of long-lost original 1977 version. A long-lost original print of 1977 Star Wars was recovered from an archive and screened for a group of cinema aficionados and diehard fans. An audience was finally permitted to watch the first released version of the film, nearly perfectly preserved and unfaded, that creator George Lucas famously suppressed from being publicly shown on the big screen for 47 years. The British Film Institute event was introduced by Lucasfilm boss Kathleen Kennedy, who joked that the screening was not illegal. What you're going to see is in fact the first print, and I'm not even sure if there's another one quite like it. It's that rare. One film critic from The Telegraph, who attended the screening last week, admitted the unaltered original looks terrible by modern standards. Yeah, it was made in 1977. Why are you comparing it to modern technology? First of all, but even then, pioneered incredible filming techniques that stand the test of time to this day, actually. Now filmmakers brag about how little CG they're using in their films, how little VFX they're using. They brag about building sets and filming on location. Now we've just been so overly saturated with VFX that people don't even appreciate when things were made by real hands, were filmed with real people and real actors. Here's another one. Robbie Collin. I felt like I was watching a completely different film, who called the print a joyously craggy, grubby, stolidly carpentered spectacle that looks more like fancy dress than grand sci-fi epic. Every scene had the visceral sense of watching actual people photographed doing actual things with sets and props that had been physically sawn and glued into place. You saw a movie with real people doing real things made with real sets and props. I feel like, are you taking crazy pills? Am I? What is going on? You just saw a time capsule of film history, a defining moment in our pop culture, and it sounds like you're trying to find something to complain about. If you're complaining about actual people doing actual things with actual props on real sets, then what are we even doing? Go watch Ant-Man Quantumania. I don't know. That seems to be your jam then, if you just want CG vomit on the screen. The slapstick between C-3PO and R2-D2 looked clunkier and therefore funnier. The Death Star panels were less like supercomputers than wooden boards with lights stuck on, and so better attuned to the frequency of make-believe. It felt less like watching a blockbuster in the modern sense than the greatest game of dressing up in the desert anyone ever played. What? I don't know what I'm hearing, but it's definitely not complimentary. Honestly, it just sounds like they're flabbergasted. Their comments were curated. Out of all the people in attendance, you found this dude who was just flabbergasted at things looking real. A backhanded compliment. That's what it sounds like. They looked less like supercomputers than wooden boards with lights stuck on. You can tell when a critic has no capacity to appreciate what they're sat in front of, because we have become so overly saturated with CG that's just been pumped out like content on an assembly line that is so rushed, and therefore filmmakers now are bragging about actually taking their time, building sets, filming on location. Denis Villeneuve strives to build sets and build these intricate props to get a better and more authentic performance. I mean, it makes a difference. This stuff stands the test of time. CG, it continuously is improved and changing and dates your films that are just so overly saturated unnecessarily. That's the nice thing about, say, pre-80s movies. What you see on the screen was an actual object in front of a camera. I do feel like this entire article, though, was manufactured clickbait. I think most of the people in attendance were incredibly privileged by what they were witnessing. I guess the ones that they could find that sounded remotely like it was insulting to a degree, I guess this was the closest they came to that. Doesn't sound like they're praising it for looking real. It just sounds more like, oh, it looks so different. By today's standards, it looks terrible. A vlogger for Cinema Savvy, George Aldridge, who says he's seen A New Hope at least 100 times, said the screening was incredibly special, but likewise made him realize there are so many great changes to the Star Wars films. It's the ones we dislike that have always overshadowed them. He too noted that the print was so radically different that it felt like watching the film for the first time. From day one, George Lucas has been making changes to these films. It hasn't just been, here's one big scene change there. It's been the little nuance. It's been the sound effects. It's been the smallest details, which you do not notice until now you don't see it. people criticize it simply because you've made the original unavailable to the public. That's the only reason why they're upset. You can tighten up the visuals, I guess the sound design, if you want to adjust that, but changing whole scenes, there's so many things that just change it so drastically. It's more than just those little things. And in Star Wars, you have the infamous Han shooting first scene. But then after that, you also have that janky looking scene with Han talking to Jabba. It's the awful CG technology they have at the time. And it just clashes so much with how the rest of the film looks. We just had this really cool scene in the Mos Eisley Cantina of all of these creatures practically made that look real, that look authentic to the world. And then the next scene, you have this CG looking slug. And again, when we see him in Return of the Jedi, it looks completely different. It's just so janky. And that technology at the time was dated quite quickly. And it was unnecessary. Han says the exact same lines of dialogue to Jabba as he does to Greedo in the previous scene. It is utterly useless and redundant. It's fine if you want to have it in there for a deleted scene or whatever, and that's how you originally envisioned it. But to not have the original available is just ridiculous. All of the other changes in those scenes of Mos Eisley on Tatooine, where he's filling up the shots with CG creatures, it looks so clunky. Whereas before, when you watch those scenes, it just makes so much more sense to see a barren desert. We are on a desert planet. People have to farm for moisture. And then you're just filling up the screen with all these 90s CG creatures. It looks cluttered. Aldrich noted differences, like R2-D2 isn't hiding behind rocks when the Tusken Raiders come for them. There are so many little things that I noticed. The cantina, there's been cleaning up of James Earl Jones' voice as Darth Vader. So ironically, a version of Star Wars that Lucas for so long didn't want to be shown seems to give viewers more respect for Lucas due to gaining some appreciation for his extensive and controversial tinkering. This seems like you're trying to paint a narrative justifying purely those changes, and it is not an unpopular opinion to not like those changes. Get rid of the CG Jabba, Han shoots first, that's the version I want to see. But this is interesting. Both reviewers noted, however, that the theater burst into applause when Han Solo shot first during the Greedo confrontation. Enthused Aldridge, Han Solo was so much cooler. There it is. Mic drop. So the two reviewers that you found that were trying to justify George Lucas's tinkering so you could have that clickbaity headline that it looked terrible. Okay, you found the two people to say that. Meanwhile, the entire theater burst into applause when Han shot first. So what do you think was the biggest takeaway from the audience as a whole? I think the audience in its entirety was happy what they were seeing, that was privileged to see this time capsule in Star Wars history. And even the reviewer admitted Han Solo was so much cooler. So there it is. The popular opinion. People liked that original screen print. Even when you're trying to say something bad, it just feels like it's a stretch. If you're trying to paint it as bad, that it looked like real people were doing real things with real props and on real sets, then I don't know what films are in your mind. It caps it off by saying George Lucas's previous comments about it, about his tinkering. When asked in 2004 by the Associated Press why he doesn't simply release the original version along with the special editions, he grumpily shot back, "The special edition, that's the one I wanted out there. The other movie, it's on VHS if anybody wants it. I'm not going to spend we're talking millions of dollars here, the money and the time to refurbish that, because to me, it doesn't really exist anymore." Penny pinching George over here. It's like, this is the movie I wanted it to be. And I'm sorry you saw a half-completed film and fell in love with it, but I want it to be the way I want it to be. I'm the one who has to take responsibility for it. I'm the one who has to have everybody throw rocks at me all the time. So at least if they're going to throw rocks at me, they're going to throw rocks at me for something I love rather than something I think is not very good, or at least something I think is not finished. Well, which is the version, George? Because you then changed it again for the Blu-ray. Was that the version then? This is more than just your preferences as a filmmaker and your vision. This is about preserving history. That's, again, where I draw the line here. And thankfully, fans have been able to preserve it. I don't know, was he sore about the fact that those original films were more of a collaboration? Whereas the prequels, those were his, solely his, in his creative direction. And it seemed like he wanted to go back and try to make the original trilogy more his. I don't get the reasoning for that. But at the end of the day, I feel like this film festival was celebrating what you yourself, George, advocated for in 1988 when you spoke to the National Film Registry, when you spoke to Congress about that and preserving films for posterity. So this screening was within that spirit. This is an amazing event that just happened, a historic event, a pristine copy of this original print kept in great conditions. You can't help but appreciate the historical significance of it.